Hey, welcome to Real Estate Resource. Thanks for stopping by. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. I really hope you enjoy this video. All right, so today we're going to work on actually writing the offer. That's what we're going to do. We're going to look at it as if we're writing it. We're going to talk about writing it with the new rules and the things that we have to do when we submit our offer. I would like to try to keep all the questions like right on with writing the offer and submitting the offer. So again, if you have a question, hand up in the chat. If you want to type it in the chat, please do, and then I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Before I share my screen, just quickly, any questions before we move on? No? All right. Okay, cool. Let me share my screen then with you guys. All right. So what you should be looking at right now, oops. Let's see. Let me make sure I have the right form. Yes, I do. Okay. So what you guys should be looking at right now is the disclosure regarding real estate agency relationships. And whenever we talk about the offer, whenever we talk about the listing agreement, this is always where I start. So right now, as we've gotten into these practice changes, this disclosure regarding agency relationships you should have prior to ever writing the offer. Okay. Now, because we have to do buyer representation agreements with all of our buyers before showing, we have to have them sign a disclosure regarding agency relationships at that time, right? So when we sit down and have that meeting with them and discuss the process of purchasing a home and what they're looking for and what they qualify for and do those things match, and walking them through the whole process of being a buyer, this is the first form they have to sign. And as a matter of fact, it should be the very first thing when I sit down for a buyer with a buyer consultation. This should be the first thing I talk about with them prior to talking about anything else. Because what this is stating is it's stating that I explained to them the relationship between agent and client, right? In this case, a buyer could be a seller, and it explains that agency relationship. And that's all it is. It's just a disclosure to explain that it doesn't bind us to work together, not like how the BRBC will, or the property showing and compensation form, and we'll talk about those today too. It doesn't bind us to work together. It is just required for me by this Department of Real Estate that I disclose to you how you can be represented by a buyer by an agent in a real estate transaction. And that's all this is. So even if I sit down for a buyer consultation, or previous to having to, being required to do the buyer consultation and have the BRBC, if I were to go out and show a property and have people sign an offer, technically, even before showing the property, I should have had this document signed. But we do it at the offer, right? So in this case, now that I'm working with the BRBC and I have to do buyer consultations, I should get this signed right off the bat. And if they choose not to work with me, meaning they don't sign the BRBC, they don't sign some kind of showing, in compensation agreement, I would still have this signed, because by the letter of the law, that's what you have to have. But for the most part, in practice, people do this in the past with an offer. Now you'll be doing it with your BRBC, so you'll have one. So what'll happen is that you don't have to send this for signature every time you write an offer if you've met with your clients and have a BRBC already, okay? So to explain the disclosure regarding agency relationships, it's a simple explanation. This is how you can be represented by an agent, either as a seller's agent, where if I were listing the property and there were a seller, I would represent them; as a buyer's agent, which right now in our relationship is I'm representing you as a buyer's agent; or as an agent representing both buyer and seller, which means that if I'm now representing you as buyer, and if one of my listings fits the criteria for you as buyer, I may represent both sides. And not only is it me, but we might find a listing that is listed with our same brokerage. And in that, we are still an agent representing both buyer and seller. That's dual agency. But in that relationship of dual agency, you have to give us permission to act in that capacity. We can't just do it without your permission. And there's another form that we'll sign that allows you to give us permission to act as a dual agent. That's it. That's all this form says. That's all it says. Now, I've seen in the past, and I haven't seen it in a while, but hopefully people have stopped doing it. When they're the seller's agent, they're circling seller. When they're the buyer's agent, they're circling buyer. They're doing that. Don't by accident confirm your relationship before you have an offer. You'll confirm your agency relationships in the offer, and we'll talk about that today, where you confirm that agency relationship. So that's it. The buyer signs, you sign, the license number for the office, you guys should all know, right? That's your license number. If it's, I'm the agent this time, right? So it's my license number. Right? And then it'll be signed and we'll date it, right? That's it. Agency relationship, very straightforward, simple. Any questions about the agency relationship, about that disclosure? Now remember, it's a disclosure. You're required to have it. And a lot of times we don't think about it as being something that's important. But if I don't have an agency relationship disclosure that is dated prior to my BRBC, or the same date as my BRBC, or prior to an offer, any of those things, if I don't have that prior to, it could jeopardize my compensation, because I'm not doing my job as an agent in explaining the fiduciary duty and responsibility to that client. I don't see a line for a signature. Do they simply sign in the empty space? This would be their signature right here next to their name, right? So in this case, the buyer is John Smith. So John Smith would just sign right here next to his name and date it. Okay, let's move on to the purchase agreement. Okay, so purchase agreement. We're going to write the offer. The date prepared is today. Now, the reason that this is important, this date prepared, right, is not because it has to do with the expiration of it or anything like that. What it does is it helps identify it in subsequent forms, which form we're referring to. So you guys might notice, like when you do an amendment or an addendum, or you do a request for repairs, or you do something that refers back to the purchase agreement, it'll say purchase agreement dated blank. This is the date they're talking about. The date it was actually created, not the date it was signed, not the date it was accepted. So whenever you see that, if you're doing an amendment and it's an amendment to the purchase agreement and it says to the purchase agreement dated, this is the date they're talking about. So that's why it's important to understand what that date is. It's not the acceptance date. It's not the date it was signed. It's that date. Because I might prepare this offer today and I might not be able to see my buyers until tomorrow to sign it. So their signature might be August 23rd, even though the prepared date is August 22nd. Okay? So that's the prepared date. This is an offer from. This is the legal and correct names of the buyers. So as you can see, I can put 4 buyers' names in. Right? I can put 4 buyers in here. Only 2 can sign on the actual purchase agreement. The other, the third or the third and fourth would have to sign an additional signature addendum. But all 4 buyers, names go right here. If there are multiple buyers, all of the names go, okay? Now, it should be their legal name, because if it's not their legal name, you're going to have an issue when it gets back to the lender also, because the lender's going to want that name to match the name that they're filling out paperwork for and trying to get their loan qualified with. They need that name. Now, besides buyer's name, which is a single buyer, could be an entity, right? So if it was, a corporation, that corporation name would go there. If it was a partnership, that partnership would go there. You could do things like John Smith and or assignee, right? So now what that means is that I'm going to buy this. John Smith is going to write the offer, but at some point during the transaction, he has the right to add somebody to it or assign it completely to another buyer. Now, the contract gives you an amount of time where you have the time to request that. But if we write an offer like this, the seller is accepting it that way. They can't deny the request. But if the buyer gets past that request time, and we make sure that if they've exceeded that request time, which by default in the contract is 17 days, they can't request any longer. So even though I've gotten the seller to agree that I have an assignee, right, or I may have an assignee, it doesn't mean I get to exceed that 17 days that the contract calls for. And we'll talk about that a little bit later when we get into the time periods, right? So full legal name, full name of the corporation, partnership, or entity that's making the purchase, and then you have and or assignee, or you could put et al. Now, this one is not, it really basically just means John Smith and everybody else in the world, right? It's Latin. It's just leaving it open in case they need to add a co-borrower. I would only use this in like extreme cases where maybe you found the perfect house, you're in the middle of the process and you're not sure, like it's right there. It's that fine line for a buyer where they qualify kinda, but it would be better if they had a co-borrower, right? Maybe you write the offer like this, and or assignee could do the exact same thing, right? I think and or assignee is probably a little bit easier for most listing agents to understand. You won't get that question about the et al. And even, I'll be honest, even title companies and escrow companies with the et al, it gets confusing. I have seen recorded title, right, grant deeds that say, John Smith et al. Is the owner, where they didn't remove that. They just recorded it exactly like it was on the purchase agreement. Okay. So I would use and or assignee preferably, but this works also. But that's the only other thing besides the actual legal name and the name of the entity that could go into this line is either et al. Or and or assignee. Does this apply to wholesale buyers? Yeah, the and or assignee, if you were going to wholesale something, would be the correct way to do it. I hate calling it wholesale. Look, I will say this. I know this is a little off topic with writing the offer, but just to put it out there, I don't believe these so-called wholesalers do things the right way. Legally, if I assign this transaction to anybody else, I have to disclose if I'm getting paid and the amount I'm getting paid for that assignment. If I don't do that, then it is fraud, and that whole assignment and sale could get reversed on top of whatever financial issues and legal issues that I could run into as a wholesaler. So just be careful. But yes, if I was doing that ridiculous wholesale stuff, I would say John Smith and or assignee, right? Because I want them to agree ahead of time that they're assigning it. Yeah, somebody put, can it reverse after closing? Yes, if you like with NODs and with these assignments where you don't disclose things, then yeah, they could reverse it after the close. Okay, let's move on. All right. The address, make sure it is the correct address. Please, when you're writing your offers, make sure it's like, we're talking about writing a strong offer here, right? That's one of the things we want to do is like have a clean and a strong offer. Double check your addresses, please. It's amazing to me how many times I talk to agents, I see offers where they misspell the street name, they transpose numbers on the street and submit their offer that way. And then the other thing that really boggles my mind is the listing agents don't counter it. So nobody's looking at it, right? Nobody's looking at, did we put the address correctly? So as a buyer's agent, if we're looking at strength of offer, make sure this address is correct, right? Make sure that all the things are spelled correctly. Make sure that we have the right counties and cities and zip codes and all that stuff, right? Make sure that's correct, because the listing agent technically has to counter that. And the fewer things When I'm writing a clean offer, the fewer things that the seller, the listing agent, has to counter to clean up and fix for me, the better chance I have, the stronger offer I have. As a matter of fact, I had an agent just recently that was telling me that a broker, right, submitted an offer on his listing, and it was so poorly written that he called the agent, this broker, who was, it's independent broker. He was his own broker, and he was working as the agent, and explained to him all of the mistakes he said he had made in the offer, told him how to fill it out, and said, resubmit it, because the way you submitted to me, I can't present it. And then when they got the offer back, still was missing some of the points that he had given him and had to be countered and cleaned up. And obviously that agent didn't get his offer accepted. But that's one of the things that you guys have to think about, is how you look. Because hopefully now with the changes in practice, the communication between buyer's agent and listing agent will be better. Let's hope. Let's hope that listing agents are more receptive to having conversations, and you guys are not just submitting offers in vacuums, because we did that as buyer's agents. We would never talk to the listing agent. We would go show a property, we would write an offer, we would submit it via email, and all we would do, and finally the first time we would talk to them, would be a text message saying, hey, have you guys presented the offers yet? And so if my offer is poorly written, and I haven't had any communication with the listing agent prior to me submitting that offer, their only interpretation of who I am and who my buyer is the quality of how that offer is written. Now, even now, as practice changes are taking effect and we have to have more communication, we have to have conversations with the listing agent, and we have to be more diligent in how we do business, because our buyers paying us, so they expect us to be professionals. Even more now, the writing of our offer should be held to a higher standard. And so the less amount that I have to be countered because my offer is clear and makes sense and is strong, the better it is for my client. And the more proof that I have for my client that this is why you chose to pay me, right? We keep talking about all this, like, well, now they got to pay. This is one of the things. If I can show you how well I understand this contract and how well I write the contract and how I know how to negotiate using these forms, that's why you pay me. That's why you pay me the 3%. Okay? So make sure your address is correct. The assessor's parcel numbers, I'm not too concerned about, because when we have street addresses, but if you are going to put the parcel number in, please double check and make sure it's the correct parcel number. Make sure, double check those numbers, triple check those numbers, right? Please make sure that you have the seller's broker in there, right? So this one is Banana Realty, okay? And their license number is 01234567, right? They are the agent is Paul Jones, right? Is the agent, and his number is 02345678, right? So put their license number in. The Banana Realty is for the seller only. The seller's agent, Paul Jones, is for the seller only. Century 21 All Stars is for the buyer, for the buyer's agent. Now, if we were double lending this, if it was my listing, specifically my listing, I could get away with not doing this, and I could put both buyer and seller and take this off. But only if it's my listing, because I'm the listing agent, I'm the buyer's agent, it's both, right? But if it's a different agent within our company, you still want to put Century 21 All Stars and that agent's name in that section. But in this case, right, we've already decided it's Banana and Paul. Okay? So make sure that's in there. Now, because if it's not correct, if the license number is missing, if the oh no, it won't let me uncheck it. There we go. If the boxes aren't checked for seller's agent, seller's broker, buyer's agents, buyer's broker, the license numbers aren't in there, that requires a counter. and I either have to counter as a listing agent and say, hey, this is the confirmation of agency, so and so represents the buyer, so and so represents the seller, right? You have to clarify that. Or there's a form for confirmation of agency that I would attach to my counter, send to you, and make sure your buyer signs it so the agency is confirmed correctly. That has to be done correctly. And that's really, besides the address, is the first mistake I see all the time. When agents bring me an offer to review, the first thing I look at is, are these boxes checked and did they put the license numbers in? Armando has his hand up. Go ahead, Armando.
Good morning. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Just a quick hint for all the agents. Instead of filling out like the address and everything else, when you're doing the offer at the beginning, you could put the MLS number and it'll auto-populate all the addresses, APN numbers, the agent information, and all that, just in case you guys want a quicker way of getting all that stuff in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, when you're using online zip form, use whatever shortcuts there are, but there are still some agents that are, maybe they have to handwrite these out in the field, or they don't have internet, they have whatever it is. I want to make sure, and it's a great tip, please use the MLS to fill this stuff in, because then if there's any mistakes, it's a mistake made from the MLS, not you handwriting it. But also making sure that you know how to write this and look at it and read it is going to help you to avoid mistakes also. But yeah, good tip, Armando. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so we got the agents' names in there. We got the licenses. We double checked. Everything is there and it's correct. Okay. If there were more than one brokerage representing the seller or buyer, we would check this, and it would include a form called additional broker acknowledgement. That's for, co-listings, or if we have a buyer that we're working with an outside brokerage on. For this example, we're not going to go through that because it doesn't happen a lot, but all you have to do is check that box and you add that ABA form in there, and it's just what the agreement is between these two brokerages to represent whichever party they're representing. Potentially competing buyers and sellers, that's the PRBS. We'll talk about that form. They moved it to the end of the purchase agreement. It used to be right after the agency disclosure, but that's the document that I was mentioning when we were talking about the agency disclosure, that explains to them how the market works itself, how competing buyers and sellers work and accepting different offers, and how dual agency works, and it's their authorization to work as a dual agent. That's what's on that form, okay? Terms of the purchase and allocation of costs. The items in this paragraph are contractual terms of the agreement. Reference paragraphs provide further explanation. This form is 17 pages. The parties are advised to read all 17 pages. It went up by a page, right? So it was 16 pages before July 24th. It's 17 now. So don't lose track of your pages. There's 17 now. Everything that we're going to negotiate and fill out and work on right here is paragraph 3. I hear people say paragraph, like they'll reference paragraph 5, paragraph 5B. That's not the paragraph where you're negotiating. This column of paragraphs here, the second column over in the graph, is the explanation. Like, it's more detail about this item. So it's giving you, breaks down like detail. It goes into detail what the laws are, how much things, it just breaks it down a little bit more. But in the negotiating piece, everything is paragraph 3 right here. Paragraph 3A, paragraph 3B, paragraph 3C. So when you guys get text messages from me, when you ask me, hey, where do I find this? Where do I do that? And I say to you paragraph 3G3, then this is what I'm talking about, right? Like 3G3 is the seller pays obligation to buyer's broker, and we'll get to that. So it's one you guys need to know and understand, 3G3. So when I say 3C, I'm talking about the expiration of the offer, okay? And that's how I'm going to refer to things. And as I update our counter thing, right, the counters, the handout I've given you guys, I have to update it because of the changes. Once I up that, that's how it's going to be referenced. Paragraph 3A, B, C. I do things by paragraph. It's much easier and quicker for you guys to find it that way. Okay. All right. So let's get into the purchase price. 3A, straightforward purchase price. How much are we offering? Right. 800,000. I put 8 million. Yeah. Right. 800,000. Now, do not check the box for all cash unless it is literally all cash. They have $800,000 in their bank account that they could deposit into escrow. Then it's all cash. If they are getting some kind of a hard money loan or private financing or anything like that, do not check off the box because there are still conditions on that financing. And we'll get to that financing piece in a little bit. Okay. Close of escrow. How many days after close of escrow? I always suggest 30. You can close early if you want. You can extend from there. I always say 30. This specific date thing would be only if it was like a specific issue that I need to close by this date, right? Maybe it's because I have a 1031 exchange I'm doing, so I have to close by that date or else, I'm going to get hit with the taxes. I have to close by that date or else, whatever it is. That's a very specific item. But for the majority of the offers you're going to write, it's going to be 30 days after acceptance. And that 30 days after acceptance, if everybody agrees, if we're ready to close in 18 days and buyer and seller agree, then guess what? You can close in 18 days. You're not bound. You don't have to wait for the 30th day. But that just gives us a guideline to work with. If we need more time, we can do extensions of time from there. If we're ready to close early, like I said, everybody agrees and we close early. Okay. Now, expiration of offer. The default, how the contract is written, 3 calendar days, not business days, calendar days after all buyers' signatures. So not from the day we wrote it, not from this date up here, but from the day all the buyers sign it. So if there's 5 buyers and the 5th buyer signs it a day after everybody else, that's when the expiration date starts, 3 calendar days after that day. Now, if I'm communicating with the listing agent like I should be, I'm having conversations with them, one of the questions I'm going to ask prior to submitting my offer is, when are you going to be presenting offers to your seller? For some reason, agents don't ask that question. And then when we submit the offer and we call the listing agent, we've already written it and submitted it. And then we call the listing agent and say, hey, I just submitted an offer. Great. When are you guys going to present? And he goes, oh, well, the seller's out of town, so not till next Thursday. So a week from today. Now my offer expires on Sunday, right? Friday's day 1, Saturday's day 2, Sunday's day 3. My offer is expired technically by the time it comes to presentation. Why wouldn't I ask that question prior to writing the offer and submitting it, right? Hey, listen, listing agent, we went and saw your property today. My buyers loved it. We're heading back to my office right now to write the offer. Let me ask you quickly, what's the best offer you have? Now, I already know they're not going to answer that question. I already know, but I'm going to ask. Oh, I'm sorry, I can't tell you that, blah, 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 whatever. We're not even going to talk about compensation. We should have done that already, right? Or I could there too. I could say, hey, by the way, is your seller going to offer compensation? Yes. Okay. Terrific. When are you guys going to present your offers? Okay, next Thursday. Now I know that I can write on here a specific date, right? So next Thursday is the 29th. Okay, or maybe I can go all the way to next Friday because I want to give them some time. So now my offer doesn't expire. Oop, I went to the wrong one. Why did it go there? There we go. 30th. August 30th. Now my offer doesn't expire. Now my offer is valid all the way through when they present it. Because if I have an offer that's expired already, the terms of that offer aren't valid. If the listing agent were really like by the letter, then the counter would have to state something about the idea that expired offer is still valid and that the buyer is still going to go by those terms. So again, we're talking about writing strong offers. So let's do that. I guarantee you that most listing agents never get asked that question about when they're presenting and then get an offer that exceeds their presentation period. Because agents don't think that way. Buyers agents don't think that way. You guys got to start thinking more professionally, especially because I have to start charging my buyer for the work that I do. So please ask that question. Initial deposit amount. Initial deposit amount. Look, as prices continue to rise, because they do, that it's still a seller's market. Inventory is creeping up, but it is still slim. So it is still a seller's market, and that means that prices are still gradually going up. Not as crazy as they were, but they are. And as we get into these higher prices, you're probably going to start getting a lot more offers where they're going to be asking for, 3% of the purchase price, or, 1% of the purchase price. You know what I mean? Like, just the idea that we're putting 5,000, like that, I still see offers on properties that are $700,000 or $800,000, and somebody's putting a $5,000 initial deposit. If we're talking about strength of offer, that's not going to be a good first indicator about how strong your buyer is. So remember that this is one of the main indicators that an agent is looking at about strength of offer, because this is what my commitment is to you. I'm telling you that I'm willing to risk this amount of money in order for you to take your home off the market and give it to me as buyer, like allow me the opportunity to purchase it. And if I act in bad faith, I understand that this money could be forfeited by me. But if I'm putting $3,500 or $5,000 on an $800,000 property, if I'm a listing agent, I'm looking at it like, how committed are they really? Especially if I'm putting 10 or 15 or 20% down. Now, if I'm only putting 3.5% down for my down payment, I get the hesitation for putting a 3% of the purchase price here as the deposit. And because I understand that disputes arising from that, if they exceed $10,000, are going to be, more difficult for us to get through and to decide and figure out who gets the deposit and who doesn't. But also, now we're negotiating compensation with in our offers. So the stronger your offer is, the more likely a seller is to pay compensation. So maybe these are conversations you start having with your buyers that a minimum of 1.5% or a minimum of 10,000 up to 3% of the purchase price. That's the area where we decide how much deposit you want to put in. But I can't imagine that you guys should ever be writing an offer that is less than $10,000 for the initial deposit. Never. I mean, it's just, again, strength of offer. This is my commitment. And at the prices that we're at even at 3.5% for FHA buyers, they're still having to put more than that into escrow. And if my down payment is now the majority of my down payment is now my deposit, again, what's stronger than that? What's stronger than that? I'm basically giving you all my money as my initial deposit to show you how committed I am to purchase this home. I mean, I know 10,000, 800,000, it's not that, but think about strength of offer. Okay. So I would say minimum of 10, but negotiating over between 10 and 3% of the purchase price. Okay. Any questions so far? No. All right. Increased deposit, you're not going to use often. Generally, what increased deposit is for is that they needed a larger deposit than what you had available to you at the moment, right? So usually this is used by people who are maybe borrowing from a home equity or borrowing from a 401k to make their purchase, because in order for me to get the money out of my 401k, I have to have an accepted offer. So let's, for example, say that I had $10,000 cash ready to go. That's what I had saved. And the rest of the money for my down payment and my deposit or the rest of the money I needed to purchase the home was in my 401k. But the seller was adamant that, oh, you know what? At a minimum, I need a $20,000 deposit. Well, then I could put $10,000 here, and they would be getting that $20,000 deposit. But it would come in when I removed all my contingencies, or if I had a date in mind, I could probably, go 2 weeks out and say, we'll do it then, because it's, I don't know what the turnaround time is on 401ks now, but if we got the offer accepted, it's probably going to be somewhere around 10 days where that money's going to be available. If you wanted to, buy a little bit extra time, you could say, we'll go here. Right? By that time, I'm going to put this additional money in, and you're going to use this form, the DID, which makes it subject to liquidated damages, just like your initial deposit. And we'll talk about liquidated damages later as we write the offer. So that would really be the only time you would use this. Most of the time, you're going to put all your money in your initial deposit at the beginning and not use it. Okay? So for today, let's get rid of increased deposit. We don't need to talk about that. Okay. Loan amounts. Now we have to decide, okay, what is our loan amount and what is the type of financing. Let's just say in this case that it's going to be, conventional loan, right? So it's 20% down that they're putting on this one. So 20% down conventional. We're going to keep the math easy. Well, for me, we're going to keep the math easy, right? So 800,000, we're going to finance 80% of that, right? We're going to take 20% out. So what is that? We'd have to do here. See, look, I thought I was going to keep the math easy, and I still 8,000 minus 20%. So our loan amount is going to be $784,000, right? That's our loan amount. That's not right. That's 98%. What did I do? See? Even when I try to keep the math right, I put 2% instead of 20%, didn't I? There we go. It's 640,000. Duh. That's terrible. That's terrible. You guys stop listening to anything I have to say. My math skills are awful. Okay. So now it's 640,000 is our loan amount. So what that means is, of the $160,000 that we had to bring in for our down payment, there's $150,000 left because we put $10,000 here. Had we left that original $10,000 that we had here, we'd have to bring an additional $140,000 in to close escrow, right? All this math is going to add up. So whatever numbers you have here, you start here with 800, you got 10, 640, and 140 should equal this number, should be the same as this number up here. I know this will do it on its own, but again, it's just for us to double check and make sure things are correct. Okay. So we're taking out that increased deposit, goes back up to 150. Now, its conventional loan is the default. You don't have to check anything. It's a conventional loan. If it were an FHA, for example, if we were doing this FHA and it was only 3.5% and you check that box, it would include the FHA VA form, which is protects your appraisal. Okay. Now, this is the section right here, the not to exceed percentage. Okay. You have to put something in. You have to. As we start dealing with more and more experienced listing agents that understand how the contract works and making sure things are done properly, and for you as listing agents, I want you to understand the importance of it. If there is nothing in here, if there is a rate that is too low, or if it says something like BPR, which stands for best prevailing rate, which this obviously calls for numbers, not letters, any three of those items, a blank, a BPR, or an interest rate that is far too low, could ultimately negate the loan contingency removal. What that means is a buyer could write this offer. Let's say that, I don't know what rates are right now, so we'll just assume everywhere it's 6. But I write an offer at 5.25 because I swear I have this lender that can get me this great rate, right? So I write it at 5.25. As a listing agent, I'm looking at it, I'm like, there is nowhere in the world you're getting 5.25, right? Just not happening. That's the thought process. But we accept the offer, or I don't pay attention to it as listing agent, and I accept that. Or as buyer's agent, I write that because I want my buyer to stay happy. One of the issues I think that buyer's agents have with this process of how you approach is that they're afraid, or they don't understand how to explain it to their buyers, so they're afraid their buyer's going to be pissed off. Okay. So we write this little interest rate in there. The listing agent ignores it, doesn't pay any attention to it. We remove all of our contingencies as a buyer. We do all the work, right? You as buyer's agents, you work hard. You get their offer accepted. You get them through with all their contingencies. You negotiate their repairs. You get them exactly what they want. They remove all their contingencies. You think, I'm in the home stretch. They get their approval, and instead of the 5.25 that you wrote here, it's 6.25. The buyer could say, I agreed to a rate not to exceed 5.25. I am not going to accept 6.25, and I will be canceling. And even though they remove their contingencies, they could still get their deposit back because this is a binding part of the contract that nobody could live within. So we have to be really careful with this. So for all of you guys as buyer's agents, what needs to happen is whatever rate your client has gotten approved at, you've got to bump it up a quarter to a half a point. And you could talk to your lender about how volatile they believe their rates are at the moment when you're writing the offer, or where they feel they're going to go in the future, to kind of decide between that quarter and half a point. And that's why it's important that you guys have a relationship with your lenders, that they are part of your team, and that you're loyal to the lender that you work with, that you're not fluttering around like a butterfly using whichever lender has the next shiny thing. Find the person that provides good service. Find the person that provides the best rate for your client, not the one that lines your pockets, not the one that pays for your lunches, not the one that buys you flyers. None of those people. The one that gives you the best service, the best rate for your client. Help provide great service for your clients, and you will make money that way. Trying to fleece lenders and your rest of your affiliates is not the way to make money. But I digress. Find somebody that you trust, find somebody you work with, and have those conversations with them. So now if your buyer is getting, a 6.25 or whatever it is right now, then I'm going to make it a 6.5. If my lender feels like, things aren't too volatile right now, we should be good with that quarter of a point cushion. And when I have a conversation with my buyers, the conversation with my buyers is going to be, hey, listen, the reason we're doing this is because rates are volatile right now. And because we have to make sure that we're committed and showing our commitment to the purchase to the seller, is that we're going to put that cushion in there. So yes, we know you've qualified, you've locked the 6.25, and that's what you're going to get, but you're committed to go up to 6.5% because I want this house. And that's the way you talk to them about it. But it seems like buyer's agents are so afraid to have a conversation with their buyer about really the process of purchasing a home. So that has to be there. I don't care if you're buyer's agent, listing agent, you have to put that in. You have to put an interest rate in. There has to be something there, and you have to allow for a cushion for rates to change. Period. End of story. Okay? If you're a listing agent and you accept offers with blanks or interest rates that are too low, you're putting yourself in jeopardy. And I can tell you from experience, we've had transactions here where a buyer was going to walk because a listing agent accepted a rate that was too low because they got sold by a buyer's agent and a lender that rate was going to happen, and it was nowhere near that rate. So please take that seriously. That's one of the things that it's one of the things that when I look at offers, I tell people right away, hey, listen, you got to counter this. I don't know how many agents actually go back and counter it when I tell them to do it, but you should be making sure that this is something that's taken care of, whether you're the buyer's agent or the listing agent. Questions about the financing? Anybody? All right, moving on. Additional financing. If it's a VA or FHA, you have to give the lender required repairs in 17 days. The lender required repairs are on your request for repairs, just like you would do if you were doing it based on a home inspection. So just try to get your appraisal done as soon as possible so that you can submit all your repairs at one time. Additional finance, again, you're probably not going to use this. This is for like second trust deeds and other financing that's going to, like, the additional to this first trust deed up here. That's not happening right now. So, maybe someday it'll come back, but as for now, we don't have to worry about that. By default, on paragraph 3E3, this is the occupancy type, and it's by default, it's your primary. But if this is going to be a secondary home or like a vacation home or an investment property, you have to check that box and disclose it. And the reason is, if we're trying to make it look like it's their primary house and we're getting a rate that is based on them making this their primary residence, again, that's not legal because the rates are going to be different for people who aren't purchasing their primary residence. The rates are going to be different, and that's just how it is. So you've got to make sure you're disclosing that in your offer. Be honest and talk to your buyers about that. Okay. All right. We got through the first page. Any questions on the first page at all? Stuff that came up that you're thinking about right now? Anybody? All right, cool. All right, here we go. Seller credit, if any, to buyer. This credit is solely about closing cost credits, concessions from the seller to the buyer. This G1 has nothing to do with the compensation to the buyer's broker, unless the buyer is going to use those concessions to pay their closing costs and use the cash they have to pay their buyer's agent. Okay? That's the only way these concessions are any way attached to a compensation. Otherwise, this is just solely for the buyer to use for closing costs, to buy down a rate, something that the buyer is going to actually use it for. Okay, this is not for concessions. That's it. So if you are going to ask for a credit, if your lender tells you that your buyer needs help with their closing costs, I hate when people try to use the max, right? Like, we're talking about writing a strong offer. So whatever it is, it's 4% is the max I can get. So they just ask for whatever 4% is. So in this case, what 4% is $32,000 in closing costs. There's no way that you're going to need that much, or right? Or 3%, $27,000. No, ask your lender specifically, how much money do they need to subsidize the money they have for closing costs? Get the number, whatever that number is. Okay, they need, $14,000. Okay, great. Ask for the specific number, because if I put in there whatever the 4% number is, right, the 32,000 in closing costs, which is crazy, even though that's the allowable, that's probably not going to be the amount of closing costs they need. But if it is the number, if that's the true number, put that, because otherwise, if I just put the 4%, ask for the maximum, as seller, I had listing agent, I have to assume that that's what is going to get paid, and I have to show that as this is what's being deducted from your net, this $32,000. But if the buyer doesn't need that, why do that disservice to the buyer and make it look like they do? Ask for the specific amount, right? Okay, so we need 12. Okay, great, 12,000, perfect. That's what my lender says we need. That's what we're going to ask for, and that's it. That's what you're going to do. Now, additional financing terms, if this is some kind of special program, right? This is a down payment assistance, right? You could put in here, and I should probably put buyer first, buyer to qualify for down payment assistance, right? This is a special loan. If you know the name of the loan, the program, put the name in. If it's a grant, put the grant in. Put that in there. If it is, a hard money, then you would put, buyer may pursue hard money financing or private money financing, right? You put that in. You let them know, okay? That's what additional financing terms is for. That's what it's for. Okay, so credits, make sure it's the exact credits. Special programs, you have to disclose that. If it is some kind of down payment assistance program, you have to disclose it. You have to. Because if you don't, again, just putting FHA and not putting them as down payment assistance, it's smoke and mirrors. Why do I want to deceive? I just want to write a strong offer and be completely honest with my listing agent, because it's going to help me in the long run. All we're going to do is just delay issues if we don't tell the truth. Okay. All right. So let's get into it. Seller agrees to pay the obligation of buyer to compensate buyer's broker under a separate agreement. Okay. Now, I'm checking this box because I'm asking for the seller to pay my buyer's obligation to compensate me, the buyer's agent. Okay, in order to do that, I have to check this box and include this form: seller payment to buyer's broker. Okay, now I have had a conversation with the listing agent. I have asked the listing agent, is your client willing to compensate the buyer's broker? Yes or no, right? That's what would be the answer, yes or no. I may ask, how much is your seller willing to compensate? The listing agent may say to me, they have a number, they may go up to 2% or may go up to 2.5%, but it's dependent on the offer. They may say, I don't know. They are willing to pay. I don't know what their maximum is. Their compensation, the amount of compensation they're willing to pay, is going to be determined by the strength of the offer, right? what I should be doing is, if they give me a number, I'm going to put that number in. So let's say I talked to Paul Jones, and Paul Jones said, look, my seller's going to pay a maximum of 2%. That's it. Doesn't matter what your buyer representation agreement says. They're going to pay you maximum of 2%. And that's a maximum. So depending on your offer, they may want to negotiate a different amount. Okay? And that's perfectly okay. They can do that. So he told me they'll pay a maximum of 2%. So I'm going to do it based on the purchase agreement that's dated 8/22. This is the property that we're writing the offer on. This is the buyer's name. I don't know the seller's name. If I know it, I can put it in. I don't know it at this point, so obviously we're not going to put it in. I'm the buyer's broker. Paul Jones is the seller's broker. And now, amount. Subject to paragraph 1B below, seller agrees to pay buyer's broker 2% of the purchase price, or if checked, a flat rate. Okay? Maximum seller payment obligation. Seller shall only be obligated to pay buyer broker the lesser of the amount specified in paragraph 1A, or the amount buyer is obligated to pay buyer's broker pursuant to their buyer representation agreement, and if applicable, less any amount that others have agreed to pay buyer's broker. If there is no buyer representation agreement, then seller has no obligation to pay buyer's broker. So now I'm requesting the 2% that they said that they would pay. I have a buyer representation agreement with my buyer, John Smith. It's exclusive. We're working the counties, and I have an agreement at 3%. Okay? I must submit this entire buyer representation agreement with my offer, with the SPBB, and then that all goes to escrow. Now, the seller is only obligated to pay me the 2%. It doesn't exceed the 3% I've negotiated with my buyer. So technically, my buyer is now on the hook for that additional 1%. Now, we could talk about how we can negotiate that, and we can. We can modify it later if we want to. Once we get an escrow, we can modify it and reduce the amount of compensation that my buyer is going to pay me to 2%, so it matches and the obligation is taken up by the seller. But that's not what we're talking about right now. We're talking about writing the offer. And this is what I have to submit. I have to submit my buyer representation agreement, the SPB, and my offer. Now, if I don't have a buyer representation agreement, I may have done a property showing and representation agreement for that one property. And that one I have also put in 3%. And that one starts now and goes until September, right? Just can't exceed 30 days. But now I have that. Okay? One of those two things, the BRBC, have to go with your SPBB, right? SPBB is this form, seller's payment to buyer's broker, signed by your buyer, has to accompany your purchase agreement if you want to get paid pursuant to paragraph 3G3. That's it. Okay? That's how it's going to work. That's how you're going to submit your offer in order to negotiate whether or not you're getting your compensation paid by the seller or by your buyer. Okay? There's no other way. That's the right way. You know, I got questions as of yesterday was, what are the forms I have to submit to get compensation, right? Do I have to send all of them? Can I just send one page? Can I just send? Nah, send it all. Send it all. It has to show that it's fully executed. You have to show them that that buyer agreed to pay that amount, because you remember, you're capped at what that buyer agreed to pay you. No matter what the seller is willing to pay you, you're capped at what you got what you negotiated with your buyer. Okay. Let's see. Is it the TC responsibility to send this to escrow and or complete form? Not to complete the form. Absolutely not. This has to be done prior to showing. The BRBC has to be done prior to showing. Writing your offer should never be somebody else's responsibility. So you can't have the TC can't write your offer for you. The TC can't do your BRBC for you because you have to do it prior to showing. The property showing and agreement, you're probably doing that in an open house. So no, the TC can't do that for you. Now, what needs to be submitted to escrow? Yeah, I could see that being the TC's responsibility to make sure the complete file is to escrow. Yeah, that's what they're there for, right? To back us up. So, but not to prepare. Not this. This is negotiating, guys. Things that you're negotiating should only be prepared by you. Period. End of story. That's it. All right, so it is nearly 12. We'll finish there. We'll continue next Thursday. Any questions that I can answer for you guys before I let you go? Anybody? No? Well, you could type it in the chat. You could click raise my hand. Anybody? No? All right. You guys know how to get a hold of me. I'm right here. Send me an email. If you have questions, you could text me. You could call me. This video will be on YouTube hopefully later today. You could go back and watch anything that you may have missed from the beginning, or just to continue to review and to sharpen your skills. I appreciate that all of you guys spend time on Thursdays with me for this hour. I know your time is valuable, so thank you guys for being here. Take care of yourselves and be productive.